Eleanor Wright learned early that silence could be mistaken for weakness. She was not weak. She was tired. At 47, Eleanor had mastered the art of being unnoticed. She moved through her days like a shadow stretched too thin, present but never acknowledged. In grocery store aisles, people reached past her. In meetings, her ideas floated into the air and were claimed by louder voices. In her own home, her existence had become background noise. Her husband, Marcus Wright, liked it that way. They had been married for 23 years. To the outside world, Marcus was respectable, a financial consultant with polished shoes and an even more polished smile. At church, he held Eleanor's hand just long enough for people to notice. At neighborhood gatherings, he spoke for her. "Eleanor agrees," he'd say. "She's shy," he'd laugh. "She doesn't mind." But Eleanor minded everything. She minded how Marcus corrected her stories mid-sentence. She minded how he controlled the accounts, the passwords, the future. She minded how loneliness could exist inside a marriage. Every morning, she woke before sunrise, not because she had to, but because it was the only time the house belonged to her. She'd sit at the kitchen table with her coffee, watching dawn crawl through the blinds, and imagine a life where her voice mattered. Marcus never noticed those mornings. He noticed the dinners, the clean shirts, the silence. That silence had once been love. Now it was survival. The first crack didn't come with shouting or fists. It came quietly, like everything else. A bank letter. Eleanor hadn't opened the mail in years. Marcus insisted on handling important things. But that afternoon, something compelled her. The envelope was thick, official. Her hands trembled as she read numbers she didn't recognize, accounts she didn't know existed, withdrawals that felt like theft, because they were. When Marcus came home, she placed the letter on the table. "What's this?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm inside. Marcus barely glanced at it. "Nothing you need to worry about." "I'm on the account." He sighed, annoyed, not guilty. "Eleanor, don't start. You wouldn't understand." Something shifted then, not loudly, but permanently. That night, Eleanor lay awake beside a man who had built his comfort on her quiet obedience. And for the first time, she didn't cry. She listened. Eleanor began paying attention. She noticed phone calls Marcus took outside. She noticed names repeated too often. She noticed how money disappeared and how blame never touched him. She started a notebook. Not a diary, a record. Dates, times, amounts, words. Every insult disguised as concern. Every lie delivered as confidence. She was done being confused. If Marcus had taught her anything, it was that power lived in information. And Eleanor was done being powerless. Eleanor didn't plan revenge. She planned truth. And truth, she would learn, destroys far more quietly than anger ever could. Eleanor discovered that silence had layers. There was the silence Marcus used as a weapon, the cold shoulders, the days without conversation, the punishment of emotional absence. And then there was the silence Eleanor began to use, the kind that listened, remembered, and waited. She no longer asked questions. Instead, she observed. Marcus's routines were precise. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he worked late. On Sundays, he lingered after church, shaking hands, laughing too loudly, volunteering for committees that made him look generous. At home, he barely noticed Eleanor, unless something was missing, a tie not ironed, a meal delayed. And yet, something in him had changed. He guarded his phone now like a second heartbeat. One evening, Marcus stepped into the shower and left his phone charging on the dresser. Eleanor did not rush. She did not panic. She waited until the water ran steady, until the steam swallowed sound. Her hands were calm as she picked up the device. The passcode came to her easily, their anniversary. He'd never imagined she'd dare. Messages filled the screen. Not flirtation, not affection. Planning, spreadsheets, transfers, conversations with a woman saved as CL. The tone wasn't romantic, it was strategic. We need to move the rest before she notices. The LLC is clean. She won't question it. She. Eleanor felt the word like a bruise. She scrolled until her chest tightened. Bank statements routed through shell companies, retirement funds slowly drained, her name used like permission. Then came the photos. Not intimate, but damning. Marcus at a restaurant Eleanor had never been taken to. Marcus smiling differently. Marcus sitting across from a woman younger, sharper, watching him like a prize she'd already won. Cynthia Lawson. The name appeared in a document marked partnership agreement. Eleanor set the phone down exactly where it had been. When Marcus emerged, wrapped in a towel, humming to himself, Eleanor was already back in bed, eyes closed. She did not sleep. She planned. The next morning, Eleanor went somewhere she had not been in years. The bank. The woman behind the counter smiled politely, the kind reserved for people who rarely cause trouble. "I'd like full statements for every account under my name," Eleanor said. The teller hesitated. "Your husband, usually." "My name," Eleanor repeated, softer now, firmer, "is on the account." Hours later, Eleanor sat in her car, surrounded by papers that proved what her body already knew. Marcus wasn't just hiding money. He was erasing her. Loans taken without consent. Properties listed under LLCs she'd never heard of. Her inheritance from a mother who had worked herself into an early grave, siphoned away in increments small enough to avoid alarms. This wasn't betrayal born from impulse. This was design. And design left patterns. That night, Eleanor remembered her mother. "Men don't always leave," her mother used to say. "Sometimes they stay and take everything." Eleanor had laughed back then. Now she understood. Her mother had endured quietly too, scrubbing floors, raising children, trusting promises that dissolved with time. Eleanor had sworn she'd never become invisible like that. Yet here she was. But invisibility had an advantage. No one watched shadows closely. Eleanor didn't confront Marcus. She contacted Lydia Harper, a woman recommended in a whisper, a lawyer who specialized in financial abuse disguised as marriage. Their first meeting lasted 3 hours. Lydia didn't interrupt, didn't rush, didn't dismiss. When Eleanor finished, her voice trembling only at the end, Lydia closed the folder slowly. "He thinks you're quiet," Lydia said. "Yes," Eleanor replied. "That's his mistake." For the first time in years, Eleanor smiled. Not with joy, but with clarity. From that day on, Eleanor lived 2 lives. At home, she remained compliant, predictable, silent. She cooked, she nodded. She apologized when Marcus snapped for no reason. And every apology was recorded. Every insult documented. Every transfer traced. Marcus believed he was winning. He mistook Eleanor's calm for surrender. He didn't realize she had stopped seeing him as her husband. He was now a case study. Eleanor didn't need to raise her voice. She was learning something far more dangerous. How to let a man destroy himself while believing he was in control.
Power makes people sloppy. Eleanor noticed it first in the way Marcus stopped pretending. He no longer hid his irritation, no longer bothered to soften his words. When she asked simple questions about dinner plans, about bills, he responded with sighs heavy with contempt. "You worry too much," he said one night, not looking up from his phone. "You always did." Eleanor nodded, stirring the soup. Inside, she counted. Cynthia Lawson did not intend to be seen. She was ambitious, efficient, and convinced she was smarter than the woman Marcus went home to each night. To her, Eleanor was a ghost, someone already erased, just waiting to be buried. That illusion cracked the afternoon Eleanor saw her in person. The grocery store was nearly empty. Eleanor was reaching for bread when she heard Marcus's laugh. Sharp, unfiltered, intimate. She didn't turn immediately. She didn't have to. The reflection in the freezer glass told her everything. Marcus stood too close to a woman in a tailored coat, Cynthia. Her hand rested briefly on his wrist, ownership disguised as affection. Their conversation was low, confident, conspiratorial. "We'll finalize after the quarter closes," Cynthia said. "She won't notice." Eleanor's grip tightened on the bread. Still, she didn't turn. She paid, she left, she drove home. And for the first time since the bank letter arrived, she allowed herself to feel anger. Not explosive, focused. Eleanor started a second notebook. The first was evidence. The second was psychology. She wrote about Marcus's habits, Cynthia's tone, their shared arrogance. She mapped their blind spots: overconfidence, impatience, disdain for quiet women. They underestimated her because they never looked at her. This was no longer just about money. It was about dignity. At their next meeting, Lydia reviewed the new information carefully. "They're rushing," Lydia said. "That's good for us." "Us," Eleanor repeated. The words still felt unfamiliar. "But you need to be careful," Lydia added. "If he senses you know, he'll change tactics." Eleanor thought of Marcus's temper, his need for control. "He won't think I'm capable," she said. Lydia met her eyes. That's the advantage. The danger came on a Thursday night. Marcus came home early. Too early. He stood in the doorway, watching Eleanor Wright at the kitchen table. The notebook lay open. "What's that?" he asked casually. Eleanor felt the moment stretch thin. She closed the notebook slowly, calmly. "Budget planning," she said. "I thought I should help." Marcus laughed, loud, dismissive. "You, with numbers?" He kissed her forehead like one pats a child and walked away. Eleanor waited until his footsteps faded before exhaling. 1 second slower. 1 glance closer. Everything would have changed. What Marcus didn't know was that Eleanor had learned his favorite weakness: convenience. He reused passwords. He trusted shared Wi-Fi. He never imagined she'd understand metadata, cloud backups, digital trails. Lydia had introduced her to a forensic accountant. The findings were explosive. Hidden revenue, undisclosed assets, tax irregularities. And most damning of all, emails where Marcus openly described Eleanor as unaware and non-confrontational. The words burned, but they also sealed his fate. Something changed in Eleanor. She stopped flinching when Marcus raised his voice, stopped apologizing for taking space, stopped shrinking. Marcus noticed. "You're different," he said one night. "What's going on with you?" Eleanor met his eyes, calm, unreadable. "Nothing," she said. And for once, it was true. Marcus believed the game was ending. Eleanor knew it was just beginning. Because the most dangerous moment for a man who exploits silence is when that silence learns strategy.
Cynthia Lawson liked control. She liked meetings that ended with her name on the final decision, liked watching men mistake her ambition for loyalty. Marcus, to her, was useful, experienced, connected, predictable. What she did not like was waiting, and waiting made her reckless. It started with an email sent too quickly. Cynthia forwarded a draft contract to Marcus without removing comments, casual notes typed in confidence. Once Eleanor signs, move the remaining assets immediately. She won't read the fine print. The email passed through 3 servers before landing exactly where Marcus never imagined it would: Eleanor's. The forensic accountant caught it during a routine trace. When Eleanor read it, her hands didn't shake. She felt something colder than anger. Certainty. Marcus grew sharper at home. Not violent, never that, but deliberate. He criticized the way Eleanor folded laundry, the way she spoke, the way she paused before answering. "You're slow lately," he said one evening. "Are you forgetting things?" Gaslighting, refined. Eleanor responded with neutrality, calm, a polite nod. Inside, she logged every word. Lydia had warned her, emotional abuse rarely leaves bruises, but it leaves records. And records were exactly what Eleanor was collecting.
One night, Eleanor stood in the bathroom studying her reflection. She saw the lines time had etched into her face, lines of patience, compromise, endurance. For years, she'd viewed them as proof of wear. Now she saw something else. Survival. She straightened her shoulders. "I see you," she whispered to the woman in the mirror. No one else had to. Lydia's strategy was meticulous. They wouldn't strike yet. They would let Marcus overreach. Eleanor was instructed to sign nothing new, say yes to nothing, ask no questions that suggested suspicion. Marcus, believing Eleanor compliant, pushed harder. He brought documents home. "Just formalities," he said. "You trust me, right?" Eleanor smiled. "I always have." The lie tasted bitter, but necessary. Those documents became evidence of intent. Fraud looked different when written in your own handwriting. Cynthia began pressing Marcus. "She's taking too long. We're exposed. Handle it." Marcus's calm cracked. At home, he snapped more easily. His charm dissolved into irritation. "You're lucky I take care of everything," he said one night. "You wouldn't survive on your own." Eleanor looked at him then, really looked, and realized he was afraid. It came quietly. "If anything happens to my career," Marcus said, voice low, "it'll destroy both of us." The implication hung heavy. Eleanor met his gaze. "Then I guess we should be careful," she replied. Marcus misread on tone. He thought she meant obedience. Eleanor no longer wondered if Marcus would fall, only how loudly. Because when people believe they own your silence, they never notice when it stops being empty and starts being armed.
Eleanor had waited long enough. Waiting had taught her patterns. Waiting had given her proof. But waiting was no longer protection. It was permission. The exposure didn't come from Eleanor. It came from Cynthia's arrogance. At a regional finance conference, Cynthia introduced Marcus as her long-term business partner. The phrasing was deliberate, the implication unmistakable. Photos circulated. Comments followed. Someone tagged Marcus's firm. By Monday morning, whispers had turned into emails. Marcus came home livid. "Did you talk to anyone?" he demanded. Eleanor set down her fork calmly. "No." His eyes searched her face, looking for fear, guilt, submission. He found none. Marcus's firm placed him on temporary leave pending internal review. Cynthia stopped answering his calls. Power had shifted, and she felt it. Eleanor watched it happen from the background, invisible and alert. She scheduled her own meeting. Lydia filed the case quietly. Financial abuse, fraud, marital exploitation. No confrontation, no announcement. Just a legal document that froze accounts Marcus believed were untouchable. When Marcus found out, it was too late. He stormed into the house that night, rage stripped bare. "You did this," he said, pointing. "You ruined everything." Eleanor stood. "No," she replied. "You did." The room felt smaller. "You think anyone will believe you?" Marcus sneered. "You're nothing without me." Eleanor met him, steady, unflinching. "Then you shouldn't be afraid." For the first time, Marcus said nothing. He tried charm next. Apologies, promises, tears that came too late. Eleanor watched him like a stranger. The man who had fed on her silence now begged for it. She offered none. Subpoenas followed. Cynthia's name appeared in filings she hadn't anticipated. Her professional network distanced itself overnight. She called Eleanor once. "You don't know what you're doing," Cynthia said. Eleanor listened, then hung up. This was no longer about revenge. It was about truth demanding space. And truth, once spoken, does not negotiate. The courthouse smelled like old paper and colder intentions. Eleanor arrived early, not because she was nervous, but because she refused to rush for anyone anymore. She wore a simple gray suit, no jewelry, no softness to be mistaken for fragility. Lydia walked beside her, composed, precise, already scanning the room like a chessboard. Marcus arrived late. He always did. The judge reviewed the filings without expression. Financial abuse was not a dramatic charge. It didn't involve shouting or spectacle. It involved patterns, slow theft disguised as marriage. And Eleanor's case was thick with patterns. Marcus sat stiffly, jaw tight. Cynthia was not present. She had hired her own counsel, alone.
He spoke confidently at first, rehearsed phrases, selective memory, the practiced charm that had carried him for years. "I handled the finances," he said, "because my wife preferred it that way." Lydia waited, then asked one question. Did Mrs. Wright give written consent for the transfer of her inheritance funds? Marcus hesitated. No. The room shifted. Document after document appeared. Emails, bank trails, contracts with Eleanor's forged authorization. Marcus's voice faltered. He had underestimated the quiet woman who shared his bed. When Eleanor stood, the courtroom stilled. She didn't cry. She didn't accuse. She explained. "I trusted my husband," she said, "and that trust was used against me." Her voice was calm, devastating in its clarity. Silence followed. Not the dismissive kind, the listening kind. Lydia introduced Cynthia's communications. The judge's brow tightened. This was no longer a private marital issue. It was a scheme. When Eleanor left the courthouse, cameras waited. She did not stop for them. She had spent years being unheard. Now she chose who heard her, and when.
Marcus had always believed control was permanent. He believed it lived in money, in reputation, in the way people deferred to him without question. Sitting at the defense table now, he felt that belief crack, not all at once, but in sharp, humiliating pieces. The courtroom was fuller than before. Word had spread. Cynthia Lawson arrived late and sat 3 rows behind Marcus. She didn't look at him. Her lawyer leaned close, whispering urgently. Cynthia's expression was tight, not fearful, but calculating, the kind of woman who abandoned sinking ships without sentiment. When her turn came, she chose herself. "Yes," she said, voice cool, controlled. "Mr. Wright assured me his wife was aware of all financial arrangements." Lydia stood immediately. "Do you have proof of that assurance?" Cynthia paused. "No." That pause was louder than any confession. Lydia presented the final exhibit, an email from Marcus to Cynthia. "She doesn't question anything. She never has." The judge removed his glasses. Marcus stared straight ahead, face drained of color. There are moments when a man realizes the version of himself he sold to the world no longer exists. This was Marcus's. On redirect, Marcus lost control. "I provided everything," he snapped. "She benefited from my work." Lydia's voice was quiet. Did she benefit from deception? Marcus had no answer. Eleanor watched without satisfaction. She felt no triumph, only release. The burden of being disbelieved had been heavier than she'd ever admitted. Now she didn't have to carry it. The judge ruled decisively. Asset recovery, accountability, referral for criminal investigation. Marcus's empire, built on entitlement and silence, collapsed in a single afternoon. Cynthia left without speaking. As Eleanor exited the courtroom, someone called her name. "Mrs. Wright, how does it feel to win?" She paused. "I didn't win," she said. "I stopped losing." And that was the truth. The world moved on faster than Eleanor expected. News cycles shifted. Headlines faded. Marcus Wright became yesterday's cautionary tale, a name mentioned briefly, then replaced by something louder, more urgent. Eleanor noticed the silence. This time, it was different. Marcus was ordered to vacate the house within 30 days. He left behind things he once controlled obsessively: books, cufflinks, a framed photo from a charity gala where Eleanor stood half a step behind him. She packed those remnants carefully. Not out of kindness, out of closure. When the door finally closed behind him, Eleanor stood in the living room and listened. No footsteps, no criticism, no tension humming beneath the walls. For the first time in decades, the house breathed with her. Freedom was not immediate joy. It came with quiet mornings that felt too empty, evenings where she reached for a habit that no longer existed. The mind, trained to endure, does not instantly learn how to rest. Eleanor attended therapy, not because she was broken, but because she refused to carry what was never hers. Naming the abuse felt strange at first. It wasn't loud, she told the therapist. It wasn't violent. The therapist nodded.
it was real. That validation settled somewhere deep. Letters began arriving. Emails, messages, quiet confessions. Women who had watched her case and recognized themselves in it. I thought I was just ungrateful. I didn't know it had a name. I didn't think anyone would believe me. Eleanor read everyone. She replied to some. Silence, she learned, could be shared, and in sharing it lost its power. Marcus's fall was not dramatic. It was empty. Friends distanced themselves. Work disappeared. His name became a liability. He tried to call Eleanor once, left a message filled with regret and self-pity. She deleted it, without listening to the end. Closure did not require his understanding. One morning, Eleanor caught her reflection again, this time in the same bathroom mirror where she once studied her own exhaustion. The lines were still there, but they no longer looked like damage. They looked like history. She smiled, not wide, not performative. Real. Eleanor did not rebuild her life loudly. She rebuilt it honestly. And honestly, she discovered, was the deepest form of freedom.
Eleanor didn't expect to see Marcus again. That was the strange thing about closure. It rarely announces itself. It arrives disguised as coincidence, as obligation, as one final loose end that refuses to disappear on its own. The letter came on a Thursday, not from Marcus, from his lawyer. Marcus was facing criminal charges now, not just civil penalties. Tax fraud, misrepresentation, conspiracy. His legal team needed Eleanor's cooperation to clarify timelines. Lydia read the letter first. "You don't owe him anything," she said. Eleanor thought about it quietly. Then she said, "I want to hear him." The visitation room was small, sterile, designed to remove emotion. Marcus looked older, not aged by time, but by irrelevance. He stood when Eleanor entered, unsure whether to sit again. The confidence was gone. The entitlement evaporated. "Thank you for coming," he said. Eleanor sat. "I didn't come for you," she replied. "I came for me." Marcus talked. About stress, about pressure, about how things got out of hand. Eleanor listened, the same way she once listened at home, except now she heard the truth beneath the excuses. Finally he stopped. "I never thought you'd do this," he said. She met her eyes. "I never thought you'd take everything," she replied. Silence filled the space. Not hostile. Final. Marcus swallowed. "Was any of it real?" he asked. "Did you ever love me?" Eleanor didn't answer immediately. Love, she realized, had not disappeared. It had been used. "Yes," she said finally, until it stopped being safe. That was all. As she stood to leave, Marcus spoke again. "I'm sorry." Eleanor paused at the door. Not because the words mattered, but because she wanted to be sure of her own. "I forgive you," she said, "but I don't carry you anymore." She left without looking back. Some endings are loud. Others are complete. Eleanor's was the second kind.
Marcus Wright was sentenced on a quiet Monday morning. No cameras, no crowd, no dramatic gasp. Just a judge reading consequences aloud to a man who had once believed consequences were for other people. Eleanor did not attend. She didn't need to. The sentence was firm. Financial restitution, criminal penalties, years measured not just in time, but in reputation lost. Marcus became what he had always feared. Unremarkable. Eleanor learned about it from Lydia over coffee. "It's done," Lydia said. Eleanor nodded and felt lighter than she had in decades. Eleanor moved, not because she was running, but because she was choosing. A smaller house, more light, fewer memories echoing off the walls. She planted herbs on the windowsill, took morning walks without checking the time, learned the sound of her own thoughts without interruption. Peace, she discovered, wasn't loud happiness. It was absence of fear. One evening, Eleanor sat alone, writing in the last notebook. Not evidence. Not strategy. Reflection. She wrote, "I was never weak. I was unheard." Then another line. Slower. Deliberate. Silence didn't save me. Understanding did. She closed the notebook and placed it on the shelf. She would never need it again. Eleanor didn't remarry. Not because she was afraid, but because she was full. She volunteered. She spoke occasionally, carefully, when invited. She became the woman other women whispered about. Not with envy, but recognition. If she survived that, maybe I can too. And if you're listening to this story right now, ask yourself, how many times have you been quiet just to keep the peace? And what did that peace really cost you? If this story resonated with you, if Eleanor's silence sounded a little too familiar, please like this story. Subscribe to the channel for more real, powerful narratives. And share it with someone who needs to feel seen. Your support helps stories like this reach the people who are still unheard. Eleanor Wright did not rebuild her life to prove a point. She rebuilt it because she deserved to exist. Fully, loudly, honestly. And that was her quiet victory.